Smettetela di lamentarvi. Smettetela di chiedere che vi facciano un partito, che vi facciano un movimento, che vi facciano la rava, la fava. Fatevelo!
Serve un trauma, serve una presa di coscienza, serve un qualcosa che scuota.
Coraggio intellettuale di accettare la realtà dei fatti.
Senti, ma quanto va avanti sta roba qui?
Finché non c'è una bella sveglia. E chissà quando arriva la bella sveglia.
Sia mai detto che io mi perdo una battaglia persa. Here we go. Good afternoon in Italy and good morning in California and good, well, I don't know where Marco is. So.
I'm in Italy.
So good afternoon to Marco as well. Due parole, signore e signori, sarà in inglese perché abbiamo il professor Martin Hellman con noi che parla altre lingue ma l'italiano non la parla. Quindi la conversazione sarà in inglese. Adesso cedo la parola a Marco Furio Ferrario per introduction.
Okay, first of all, thank you to Martin Hellman who accepted the invitation to talk to us today. The topic will be national and international defense, and especially rethinking or thinking international defense. I will do a very quick introduction of the framework. Let me start with a provocative and funny sentence from Bertrand Russell, who apparently said, "When I was young, I liked math, but when math became too difficult, I took to philosophy, and when philosophy became too difficult, I took to politics." Despite being most probably apocryphal, it depicts pretty well Bertrand Russell's intellectual path. And I think it depicts pretty well the path that we are about going down tonight. Only I maybe like to reverse it so we can start from some political questions and then we can take advantage of the experience and background of our guest to deduct some philosophical arguments based on mathematical proofs. So before starting, let's say why we organized this call. We are in the process of funding a political party, and some 10,000 Italians across the globe have been active in the effort, in this effort, with a few hundreds divided in dozens of thematical groups that have written political papers to feed our Congress with ideas in order to get to a political program with this bottom-up dynamic. So one of this group was focused on defense and came up with three core directions. Number one, a complete restructuring of Italian forces, both military and industrial apparatuses. Number two, the push towards a real European united effort for defense. And number three, nuclear deterrence. Now, Martin has dedicated the past 40 years on nuclear deterrence and, in general, rethinking international security, the defense dynamics between nations. So his insights are going to help us to analyze these topics. Why we need such an effort? I think that the short answer would be just look at the US. Being a military superpower is not enough to guarantee security. And I'm sure that Martin can elaborate more on this. But just as a general framework, I like to recall that this year is the 80th anniversary of United Nations Foundation. But despite the United Nations Charter being signed in June 1945, UN became operative only in October. So somewhat paradoxically, this year, it is also the anniversary of the deployment of the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. And beyond that, since 1945, the world has witnessed over 250 wars, some authorized by the UN, some disputed, many not authorized at all. And the human toll has been staggering. There are different estimations, but we're talking about something around 100 million lives lost. And the important data that we should focus is also that the majority of these victims are civilians. And this was a landmark in human history. Before world wars, the majority of victims in wars were soldiers. Afterwards, it completely flipped the situation. Some sources talk about 90% civilians. But just to remind that correlation is not causation, let's also say that this year is Martin 80th anniversary. So not all these facts may be related or correlated in a causal way, but maybe Martin can help us understand which are. So this is the general framework. Let me start with a very specific question to Martin Hellman. Would the world be a safer place if Europe achieved greater strategic independence in defense backed by nuclear deterrence? Do you think this would lead to a safer world?
No, it's very simple. I think what we need is a new mode of thinking. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Einstein famously said, the unleashed power of the atom has changed everything except the way we think, save our modes of thinking. And we thus drift toward unparalleled catastrophe. He then went on to say we need a substantially new manner of thinking to survive in this technological age. And so if Europe develops its own nuclear deterrent, there's a book that my wife and I wrote, which I will mention. It's only in English, but you can download a free copy from my Stanford website, A New Map for Relationships. And there's a section called Too Few Carrots, Too Many Sticks. And deterrence is a stick. It threatens bad behavior or behavior we don't want with destruction. Nuclear compellence is another word which most people don't know, but strategists of nuclear policy do. So we need to figure out how we're going to go to the state we need to be in, which is a much more peaceful, cooperative world. And yet the world we're in right now is very dangerous. We cannot jump there, but we need to figure out how we're going to go there step by step in a process. And so that's why I say Europe would not be safer if it maintained its current mode of thinking and just developed its own nuclear weapons. Oh, that's one more thing. You talked about the United States as the world's only superpower. I have a statement on rethinking national security, and I call it rethinking national security because that's where most people start, but it really is rethinking international security. And it's been signed by a former American Secretary of Defense, admittedly 5 years ago. I don't know that he'd sign it now with the Ukraine war going on. But my report that goes with that statement of support has as one of a dozen assumptions that the United States is the world's sole remaining superpower. It turns out, when you think about it, the United States is the world's sole conventional superpower. But what's the value and what are the risks in a nuclear armed world of being the only conventional superpower and saying you're the only superpower? It's very dangerous. Back to you.
Michele, I think Michele wanted to.
Yeah, let me go straight to what, I mean, I know your position, Martin, and nice meeting you, let's say, publicly. And I understand, but there are, and I've always had this following objection, which the Ukrainian events, but I think also the Israeli-Palestinian and Iranian events are making super clear, which is somehow, somewhere, somebody, among them some Italians, got the genie out of the bottle way back in a canyon northwest of Española in New Mexico on the top. And the genie can't be put back into the bottle. And the world is full of nasty people who have no desire to talk to you or reason, arguably, nor do the probabilistic calculation you correctly do, and simply like to play with, let's call it, fire. And therefore, the issue starts from there. Ukraine proves that if you don't have the atomic bomb, the guy with the atomic bomb takes over you, or at least tries, and keeps threatening you. I'm going to use the big thing if you don't give in, if you don't. And the Israeli-Palestinian thing shows if you have the atomic bomb, you become the big guy in the area and bomb around and shape the destiny of the area as you please, because you're untouchable. So while I agree that the idea, in particular the idea of striking first and having the ability to survive the other opponent's strike, is a little bit of a pie in the sky, and certainly highly uncertain. What I do find hard to follow is, all right, but how do I convince Putin or Kim Il-sung to give away its nuclear strategy?
That's actually a good point. But part of the thing, I keep saying Michele, is that we need to see the bad guy in ourselves as well as in the other side. And I'm Jewish, but I've studied the Gospels. And Jesus said it all. He said it beautifully in the Sermon on the Mount. Why do you worry about the splinter in your neighbor's eye when you've got a huge piece of wood in your own? And what I said when I gave a talk at Georgetown University, maybe 2.5 years ago, which is a Catholic university, being Jewish, I felt I could quote the Gospels without fear of being accused of proselytizing. And I said, given that our neighbor in Ukraine is Putin, he doesn't just have a splinter in his eye. He's probably got a huger piece of wood in his eye. But the admonition still applies. And how can we see that we have a big piece of wood in our eye? Well, there was a poll done in Ukraine that I've researched. I won't go into the details, but it was done by the University of Chicago, funded by the Wall Street Journal. I read the Wall Street Journal every day. I'd never seen it reported. I only learned of this in a roundabout way. In it, 85% of Ukrainians 4 months after the invasion blamed Russia for the war, which is no big surprise. But 70% also blamed their own government and 58% blamed the United States, which tells you, since those numbers add up to well over 100%, that there's plenty of blame to go around. And so, yes, Putin was unjustified in attacking Ukraine, but it doesn't mean that we are blameless. We made a lot of mistakes, the West and Europe as well.
I totally agree, but that does not solve the problem.
No.
I mean, the West, there is no such a thing as, I tend to think by individual actors, not even states per se, but actually leaders. I think some leaders made mistakes, some other made fewer mistakes, some political parties made mistakes, some coalition. I mean, it's very, I prefer it that way than not some simple West, East, North, South. But that doesn't, the responsibility, personally, if we focus only on the Ukrainian thing, for example, I tend to blame the Clinton administration making mistake.
Yeah, it goes way back, and you often have to go way back. Afghanistan started not in 2001 with September 11th, but Afghanistan in many ways started at least in 1979 when the Soviets attacked Afghanistan, invaded Afghanistan, and we just saw it horribly. The Afghan section of our book, which is a 5-minute read, was reviewed by Carl Eikenberry, who led the coalition forces in Afghanistan as a 3-star American general. He was later Obama's ambassador to Afghanistan. He reviewed that section for accuracy, and it's a 5-minute read. I strongly encourage people to read it. It will give you a very different perspective on Afghanistan. And I have a very different perspective on Ukraine from most people. We really need to study things before we start killing people or helping other people kill people.
This is all correct. This is all fine. I might even agree on the mistakes made in the choice of fighting the Russian in Afghanistan and the overall, if you want. Look, the point is this: we can go back, and you will probably find that I agree with you about our behavior. I'm an American citizen as well, even if I'm speaking from Italy, and I've been an American citizen by choice since a quarter century ago. But the one thing I have, let's say, failed to appreciate most of my American citizenship is our foreign policy, which I think had a twist for the worst in the middle 50s, and since then has not recovered. So we can certainly do that. We can do it with respect to Cuba, and with respect to Chile and Vietnam, and the overall idea of containment and the Nixon approach, everything. But it doesn't eliminate the fact that there are a lot of people out there that are worse, at least from my point of view. We may disagree. There are worse regime, more dangerous, more prone, not to a kind of a soft imperialism, but a kind of very hard and Mongolian style or horde style imperialism. And they got the bomb. And the question is, if they only get the bomb and I don't get the bomb, what's going to happen?
Well,
am I going to talk them into some game theoretical argument saying, look, you're not safe by having the bomb? Well, they're going to look at me and say, hey, you don't have the bomb, so shut up. I'll call the shots.
We need to figure out how to empower. We need to figure out how to empower the most reasonable elements in Iran, within the Palestinians, within Russia. And instead, by threatening them, we tend to empower the most reactionary elements. And so we need to figure out how we're going to do this. And by the way, we'll probably fail. I will freely admit I'm on a fool's errand when people criticize this approach. I think we'll probably all die. Okay? I mean, it's that bad. But what choice do we have but to try to save humanity?
This is a very good point, Martin. By the way, I put in the below description of this video links to the resources of your body of work. So there is the link of your book and Rethinking National Security and other papers, so people can read them. But let me try to put together the two positions here. You're both right. I mean, we can go back and try to figure out the fault of each party. But what Michele is saying, this is not changing the current situation. And if we are threatened by people that are not reasonable, they're not going to reasoning with us because we are smart and peaceful. Also, Martin has a good argument in saying that if we don't try to change the framework of defense and we think about defense in a local way, we will never solve the problem, because the problem is a global one. So there cannot be a global solution for a local issue. And this, I think, is true for many issues, also environmentals and other issues, economical. Like we cannot. Let's say there are three main issues in human community right now: climate change, defense, and global financial inequality that becomes inequality of power and being able to live in the world. So these three issues, because the world is global, cannot be solved locally. And in fact, there is a very nice analogy with maybe the most famous pure mathematic theorem, which is Gödel theorems. There are in each system complex enough to have some kind of operation. There are truths that cannot be demonstrated. Only you need to move to a more complex system. like in piano system, there are sentences that are true but are not provable. And if you move to the Melo Franklin system, you can then prove them. This is a kind of analogy. If we keep going with the national interest and national take on defense, we will never solve the international problem. Is my metaphor right, Martin?
Absolutely. I published a paper in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists 4 years ago, and Bill Perry, who's a former Secretary of Defense in the United States, a PhD in mathematics, so he understands numbers as well as national security, told me he agreed with my estimate and gave me permission to quote him. Basically, I concluded in that paper that a child born today has probably worse than even odds of living out his or her natural life without experiencing a major nuclear war. So this comes back to what you were saying before, Michele, that if I have a nuclear weapon, I have an advantage. Well, I only have an advantage until the other guy gets it. And what we're doing right now is encouraging nuclear proliferation. I'll give you an example, which most people don't realize. When Obama, a Democratic president, bombed Libya, he actually encouraged North Korea's nuclear ambitions because they put out a press release that most people never even saw that said this proves we were right to develop nuclear weapons. Because when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons in 2003, his nuclear weapons program, George W. Bush, who was then the president, put out in a speech said this good faith shall be rewarded, except we rewarded it by killing him. And so we need to figure out how we're going to encourage the most moderate elements in a country. And Gaddafi, while he was horrible in many ways, was doing wonderful things in others. He had given up terrorism. He'd given up his nuclear weapons program by the time Obama bombed him. And he was helping Africa. In fact, right now, Obama is reviled in much of Africa, and George W. Bush, I was surprised to learn this, is actually lauded, celebrated in much of Africa because of what he did with the PEPFAR program, I think it's called, which was on HIV, and it saved 25 million lives. And there's a wonderful New York Times video with Nicholas Kristof, who says, I criticized Bush heavily for what he did in Iraq, but he only killed 500,000 people in Iraq. He saved 25 million people in Africa. And so the trick is how are we going to do
I'm not sure I'm willing to do this kind of
finish.
accounting.
How are we going to save 25 million without killing 500,000? That's what I'd like to see us figure out.
Well, I'm just not willing to take this kind of a casual nexus. There is no connection between the choices made to invading Iraq and then staying there with whatever may or may not. I think you're being a bit generous attributing all that to George Bush Jr. In Africa.
I'll send you a link. I'll send you a link to the video. It's amazing.
You can send me any link to any video, but it's not the videos change history. The facts are there, and it's not a game. I'm not here to play a game in which Obama is good, Bush is bad, Bush is good, Obama is bad.
I'm not saying that.
That's not the issue. That's not the issue. Allow me, please. That's not the issue. In fact, I think that most of the choices made by either in foreign policy, just thinking of Obama attitude toward China and the choice doing the pivot to Asia, I am dissenting. But that's shifting the argument to a different set of topics, which we can go through, but would require a lot of patience, which is step-by-step foreign policy of United States, starting in, when do we start? Because these things are strictly connected. September 11 is not happening out of the blue. It's a consequence of a set of policies. It's probably in the mind of a person like Osama bin Laden and his initial affiliates, at least, a consequence of Bush Sr.'s decision to put US and other foreign troops in the Saudi Arabian soil and then defeat Saddam Hussein in the first Iraq war. So honestly, I don't know where to start. I mean, we can try to do it, but we need a starting point. But that doesn't solve the nuclear weapon part, Martin. That's the part. The question about nuclear weapon is which policy. I mean, you pick which country we want to talk about, but I guess we talk about United States. So let's pretend you and I, or you or me or both, are in charge of the White House and the Department of State. Which approach do we take to nuclear warfare, mutually assured destruction, development of nuclear military capability? That's I think the issue, right? Otherwise, we're going to be debating single episodes in the history of the world during the last 80 years, and I'm not sure we're going to get to a clear endpoint.
Can I push up Michele's suggestion and generalize it? Because I'm really interested in the generalization here. I think we need details and facts from history, but we should make the effort to try for generalization. So what Michele is basically saying, if I am correct, is that the world may be a more peaceful place once every nation achieved and I think the argument backing this sentence is that once everybody has atomic deterrence, we are in a Nash equilibrium. And I think there are several counter arguments to this argument, but I will let first Martin say if he thinks what he thinks about this endpoint, and then maybe I can say something.
We're human and we make mistakes. And so if all the world had nuclear weapons, eventually a mistake would be made, just as right now, eventually a mistake will be made that destroys civilization. And so we need to figure out how we're going to really rethink things fundamentally. And I have we need to rethink diplomacy, because what's the alternative to deterrence, which is a stick? The carrot is diplomacy, but we often call that appeasement. And I, again, strongly recommend that you read the section in our book on appeasement. You can search in the PDF that's freely available on appeasement. It gets a bad reputation based on one data point, which is Munich 1938. And it turns out that it doesn't deserve the bad reputation based on that data point. Even if Britain had gone to war in 1938, would it have won? Probably not. Dunkirk shows that. Even if it had managed to prevail, would it have fought all the way to the end and deposed Hitler? Probably not. And Mussolini, by the way, to bring Italy into the situation. Because Hitler's demand for the Sudetenland was actually not unreasonable. Woodrow Wilson, the American president at the end of World War I, thought that the Sudetenland should go to Austria because it was predominantly German speaking. And so even if Britain had gone to war in 1938 over the Sudetenland, even if they'd managed to prevail, which was unlikely, that would have merely postponed World War II. It would not have avoided it with high probability. So I think we need to really rethink diplomacy. And what I say when I talk about it today is that we need to base diplomacy on reality rather than wishful thinking. And you might not think we're doing that, but what do we say about diplomacy with North Korea? By the way, I don't like Kim Jong-un, but talk about people that we see as bad. But we say that diplomacy with North Korea is the solution, but it's got to be about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which sounds great until you translate that into unilateral nuclear disarmament on their part, because they're the only country that has nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. We don't. It would be nice if they would agree to unilateral nuclear disarmament, but they're never going to be that stupid. And so we need to base it in reality, but we're basing it on wishful thinking.
All right, well, let's take that example. So, okay, you just say they're not being that stupid, so they're not going to give up their nuclear weapon. How do you suggest the U.S. should behave with respect to South Korea? Or alternatively, what do you suggest the people of South Korea and their government should do?
Oh, first of all, we need to really think things through before we go killing people. And so South Korea,
go killing people. We're not fighting anybody. No, neither the South Korea nor the American are killing people right now.
Let me finish. South Korea repeatedly in their war games practices decapitation strikes where they kill Kim Jong-un. What do you think this is going to do? Do you think this is going to make him feel
completely
more
irrelevant that the North Koreans are doing the same and are actually currently sending their people to die and to kill in Ukraine? So the question again is, practically, what do you think the South Koreans should propose or offer or do with respect to the North Korean regime?
Good point. It's often said that by the way, President Trump is not my favorite person, but he did one good thing. Just a minute, let me finish. He does not get credit for something that he did. It's often said he got nothing from meeting with Kim Jong-un, but there hasn't been one nuclear test by North Korea since the Singapore summit, the first summit meeting that Trump had with him, and that's almost never mentioned. And so there are ways to get through to these people, or there are ways that might work at getting through to these people. It's not guaranteed, but we need to try something different from what we're trying. What we're doing is not working. It's not working interpersonally.
I'm sorry, I need an answer. Saying that what we're doing does not work, it takes a model to beat a model. It takes a proposal to beat a strategy. So what is your strategy practically? I mean, concretely, not saying we should be thinking, we should be debating, we should be thinking better. This is not working. We should be better. Fine, I agree. But what exactly do you believe South Korea, let alone the United States, then we'll bring the United States if you want to, should do with respect to the Northern regime?
The more liberal regimes in South Korea have tried normalizing relations. The trouble is people vote based on the economy rather than on foreign policy. And so South Korea's had a sequence of liberal regimes that have tried to normalize relations with North Korea, the Sunshine Policy, and then regimes that have been very hostile to North Korea. And so what we need to do is start working the way Trump did with Kim Jong-un and talking about how do we move things forward? And you can't solve it all in one step, one jump. That's the other thing. We need to think in terms of a process where we change things a little bit at a time. We have sanctions that can be snapped back in a moment, but we give them something to try. What sanctions relief have we given to North Korea? Absolutely zero. They're probably going to start nuclear testing again at some point because of that. We need to give them some positive incentives as well as negative incentives. We need some carrots as well as sticks.
So the sanctions with North Korea have not been there all the times. When did the North Korean nuclear plan start? And what was the American reaction and the South Korean reaction to that?
Michele, can I bring back the topic to a general one and more close to our think tank? Because obviously that it's a key situation globally, but I think the topic today is to think about global security, and especially what we can do as Europeans and Italians. So I think while it's good to have specific examples, let's try to move forward a generalization. So Michele is asking what steps can humanity do to get to a more peaceful world? And let me just pick from Martin's book. There is a very nice example that he made. He said in 1860s elections in the United States, the candidate for slavery abolition only got 0.3% votes. 20 years later, Abraham Lincoln got elected president, and the United States had abolition of slavery, something that probably at the time was unthinkable, and most people thought it was impossible, as today we think it's impossible to have a different framework. So my input is this. Right now, I think Michele is right. With the current framework, there is nothing that any nation can do to make the situation better. And then this moves us to Martin's take, which is we need to change the framework. Martin, is that right?
Yes, we need to change. We need a new mode of thinking. We need one where it's not that the other guy has a problem. I know this from my marriage, by the way. This all started the way I moved from cybersecurity, which is what I'm best known for, to international security. The waypoint was marital security. 45 years ago, my wife was ready to leave me. I didn't know this because I had blinders on. And the book we wrote is mostly about interpersonal relations for that reason. I can't point to one war. Oh, as long as I focused on my wife's errors, of which I was often right, and as long as she focused on what I was doing wrong, and she was often right, we got nowhere. We just dug our heels in. It was only when we started to focus on our own errors that we could make progress. And I can't point to one nuclear weapon that I've eliminated. I can't point to one war that I've stopped or avoided. But my life is better every day because my wife and I don't fight. Not only did we save our marriage, we've been married 58 years now, but we haven't had a fight in 20 years, which was beyond my comprehension, and I give my wife full credit for that. And so that's what people can do to start. And this is where it comes back to the teachings of Jesus, not as a Christian Messiah. I see him as a Jewish reformer. That's really what he talked about, is why do you worry about the splinter in your neighbor's eye when you've got a huge piece of wood in your own? We need to start doing that. And by the way, this isn't going to solve the problems all at once, but I would ask you, what solution do you have for solving the problem?
Oh, I don't.
Okay.
But I don't claim I
Well,
have
then
a
listen.
solution. I belong to the type of people that recognize that there are no perfect solution to big problems. Some problems are just unsolvable. Human tendency to conflict, to expropriation, to violence, to aggression, to tribal behavior is unavoidable, and it cannot be eliminated.
Okay, well,
And the analogy, I understand your point of view, and I understand the analogy you want to build with marriage and interpersonal crisis management. I think that among countries and among tribes, it's a lot more complicated and much less. It has partly to do. In the old days, it may have had a lot to do. Student of history tells us in the old days, when a state was at the end the sovereign, and the personality of the sovereign, the interpersonal relation among sovereign, was key. I'm just thinking Felipe II and Elizabeth I, probably. The Invincible Armada would have never had to be built, and that kind of, if they managed to marry each other and unite the two powers. Well, didn't work out. Things went differently. I doubt that's replicable today. And so that I'm not saying I have a solution. I believe that right now, what I said at the beginning, the genie is out of the bottle. There are people with atomic weapons. There is the example of North Korea, and I think it's quite cogent. There is a widespread view, and it's erroneous, that the North Koreans started building the atomic bomb because they saw what George Bush Jr. did in Iraq. But in fact, their work on that started much earlier, much earlier. And it started in the 90s. And it started right after there was the non-aggression, a big treaty signed in April 92 that they immediately decided to violate. The first crisis was back in I remember I was at Chicago at the time, reading about it and talking about the Korean colleagues. It was about 93, 94, 95, whatever. Carter tried, worked out for a bit, and then it was just a show, went nowhere. So, I don't have a solution. I don't think there is a grand solution. I think international relations are a continuous evolving process in which it's certainly important to discuss with people that have a critical view and ask to think out of the box. I agree. That's why I read your stuff and other. But then I don't see the strategy evolving, Martin. I think one should always try the diplomacy. One should always try the economic support. but it's not the exclusive thing. And if that implies giving up the nuclear weapons and saying, no, I don't, well, let's do it first. I'm not convinced.
I've never said we should give up our nuclear weapons in the current global environment. And that's a mistake that people will sometimes make. The question I would address to you, Michele, is how long do you think humanity can proceed on its current path, where we're tribal, where we have wars, where we have nuclear weapons, where more countries get them?
I know, I agree.
By the way, let me finish. And not exactly, I'm not asking for 10.5 years. I'm just saying, do you think we can go 10 years, 100 years, 1,000? I've concluded that we can go about 100 years on our current path, which means that a child born today has about even odds.
Yeah, I've read your estimate. Look, on this, I agree with you. Let's try to understand. As I said, the genie got out of the bottles. Maybe we should get Oppenheimer and Fermi and the Panis-Perna kids and von Neumann and beat them up. And take away their PhDs and their Nobel and say, guys, you screwed up, damn it. Okay. And Einstein, as you well know, was quite aware of that. Many of our much more distinguished than me colleagues realized the trauma, the dramatic switch. So yes, I agree with you. I don't think tribal attitudes are eliminable. They cannot wipe them. We can work on it, and I think discussions like this are useful. And I think I'm trying to use the word in a positive sense. The preaching of intellectual is very important. And try to ask people to think cooperatively. And very slowly, there might be a change of attitude. I think it's eternal crisis management. And I agree with you. The fact that we got all these bombs changed completely the picture with respect to 1900 or 1920, even if, by 1940, the amount of huge disruption that could be caused was already very high. But I agree, the atomic bomb is, not one step, but 22 steps worse. But the only thing, so I totally agree, and I agree that there is a huge risk of nuclear deflagration in the world. Fine. Yeah, that's the best I can say. As I said, I don't have an alternative strategy because I think it's a continuous process of crisis management.
And let me emphasize something. If we just got rid of the weapons, nuclear weapons in the world today, but nothing else changed, the world would actually be more dangerous in my estimation. And that's because the nations that knew how to build them would engage in a furious race to rebuild their arsenals, and whoever got there first would be tempted to use them while it temporarily enjoyed a nuclear monopoly. So just getting rid of the weapons is not the solution. We need to figure out something else. And that's where my process, and it's not mine, by the way, I got it from other people. The idea of a process comes in. We need to do step at a time. So my wife and I haven't had a fight in 20 years. We committed to not fight over 40 years ago. So it took us roughly 20 years to get to that point. We fought a lot in those first 20 years. We had a lot of things we had to unravel. And this is what the nations of the world need to do. We need to unravel a lot of things, and we'll probably fail. And again, let me emphasize why I said that I'm on a fool's errand. When I did my work in cryptography that won me the Turing Award, which is sometimes called the Nobel Prize in Computer Science, all my colleagues told me I was crazy to do that work, and they were right. And since I've won the Turing Award, I've had a chance to ask 6 Nobel laureates whether the work that won them their Nobel Prizes was encouraged or seen as foolish, crazy, never go anywhere. 5 out of the 6 were very clearly in the foolish, crazy, never go anywhere category. One of them, Lou Ignarro, who's Italian-American, as you can tell from the name, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology in 1998, told me about 2 years ago. He said, the dean even came to me and said, Lou, why are you doing this crazy work? We hired you because you do good things. Crazy work that won him a Nobel Prize. So the best ideas often appear foolish a priori.
Let me say something on this line. I started with the UN nation and the inception and the 250 conflicts coming afterwards. So pretty pessimistic and bad reputation if we look at that way. But I think we should look at a broader angle. And what Michele said is basically human nature is aggressive, and that's it. You can't change that. I think that's only partly true. If we look at our progress as a species, actually, I could argue that we can summarize our species in one word, which is actually change. Everything that we do in our culture is against nature, from wearing clothes to wearing glasses, editing a genome to find cure for illnesses. Everything that we do is against nature, and we succeeded in changing for the better in almost every field of nature. So this should give us hope that is it possible to build a society where at least at the international level, violence is ruled out. Let me do some example. This goes back at least to 1795. Immanuel Kant wrote an essay called "Perpetual Peace" on perpetual peace, and then we had like the League of Nations in 1920. We had the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. Of course, we had the UN in 1945. So there is a process going on. And if we look at this process, unfortunately, most of the step forward has been made after a big crisis. I think culture may be mature enough now, today, to make the next big step before the big crisis outburst, namely World War III. What can we do to make this happen?
Well, first of all, let me just say you hit the nail on the head. People have been telling me for 45 years that the mentality of war is the immovable object. We can't get beyond it. And they're right in one sense, but the survival drive is the irresistible force. And what those two are in opposition. If we do not become more peaceful, we're going to destroy ourselves with absolute certainty. There's no question of that. And so what we need to do is to bring into clear focus for society, because it does not realize it now, that the war mentality and survival are in opposition. And if society comes to see that, I have confidence that it will choose survival over war. But first, we have to bring that into clear focus. Oh, and my key mentor in this area, who was born in the 1890s, so he's no longer alive, he said there are two basic hypotheses concerning humanity's capacity for change in this technological age. The nobler hypothesis, the better hypothesis, is that we're capable of the radical changes required. The less noble hypothesis is that we're doomed. If we accept the less noble hypothesis, he pointed out, we're doomed even if we had the capacity for change, because we won't think ourselves capable of the radical changes required. If we accept the noble hypothesis, the worst that happens is we go down fighting, and the best that happens is we succeed, where, as Michele has pointed out, it seems like we have no chance of survival. So why not assume the noble hypothesis, he said back then, and I agree with him now too.
I think this is a very strong game theoretical strategy, which is very hard to counterfeit.
Let me take exception. No, there is no game theory. There is a understandable and appreciable invitation to humans. It's to think differently. But there is also contemporaneously a refusal to accept the game theoretical nature of the problem. The game theoretical nature of the problem requires that you take the other people strategy for what they are, not for what you would like them to be.
I disagree on this.
The one thing
is a strategy that the player has no incentive to change no matter what the other player does.
That's a definition of a Nash equilibrium, but that's
yeah.
But it's neither here nor there in this case. It's neither here nor there because that's not the matter. Before deciding what strategy is an equilibrium, you got to ask what the other guys are thinking about you, and what their approach is, what their beliefs are about your payoff function, and so on and so forth. I don't think. I mean, if you really want to use arguments from game theory and all this, well, we can try, but it won't lead us.
You're right.
Because
you're right. Right now, we're doomed because society does not realize that it's facing.
We are doomed in expected value. It's a Poisson process, Martin, just to speak technically.
Yes.
And well, so the Poisson process has an arrival rate, and the arrival rate can be changed. Right now, it's a Poisson process with a positive arrival rate. So the question is, and it's unavoidably a Poisson process with an expected arrival rate.
Well, what I think we need to do is, and it's going to be a very difficult issue to bring into clear focus for society, is to get them to see that where we're headed now is headed for disaster.
I think people are aware of that. The problem is that listen, a conversation like the one you and I are having with Marco, right? The three of us are having. How often do you think a conversation like this is streamed publicly in, say, Iran, Russia, North Korea, or, well, no, in Israel it is. So I shouldn't put Israel in that group. In any of these three countries, the answer is, or in China, the answer is almost never or never. So the point, for example, of trying to invite people to change mentality is now very biased, very unbalanced. That is, the West has been asking itself this question. Intellectuals in the West are asking this question repeatedly, have been asking this question repeatedly since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because after all, you know better than me, this thing started right there. I don't think it's been an open topic of debate in other parts of the world.
I think it's more so than we realize. I'm going to tell you something. I have a theory about how Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union, because that seemed like a discontinuity. But I was in the Soviet Union in 1984, and one of my friends who had joined the Communist Party. And I was surprised because he was a really nice man. He was a really intelligent man. He was a very honest person. And I had the impression that the only people who joined the Communist Party did so for personal gain. So I asked him, I said, why did you join the party? He said, well, there'd been pressure on me to join the party for many years because he was a mover and a shaker. He did things. And he said, but he said he realized that eventually that the power in that country, in the Soviet Union, was with the party. And if the good people like him did not join the party because of what the bad people did with it, then it was just going to get worse and worse. So he joined the party. And my theory about Gorbachev coming to power is that enough people like my friend were forced into joining the party, pressured into joining the party, so that eventually someone like Gorbachev could be elected chairman of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And so we need to think about, while we don't see the debate going on in those countries, it goes on privately. I believe it does. I have a friend from Iran who might be foreign minister if Mossadegh hadn't been overthrown in 1953. That's a long story as to why that is. But he's told me that if the Ayatollahs tried enforcing their moral code in Tehran, there would be a revolution because the young people would not put up with it. So there's a lot more debate going on than we realize, and I'm convinced. Privately, not publicly.
And after all, we're only responsible for our actions. We can only be responsible for our actions. So we should think what we should do. But I just wanted to read you a very quick quote, which was eye-opening to me in many ways. And it's this: we recognize the imperative need for the development of a military power, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implication. We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals. And to my surprise, this is not Mahatma Gandhi. This is
Dwight Eisenhower.
Eisenhower, exactly. Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces and Supreme Commander of U.S. Forces and twice President of the United States. As probably Martin recognized, it was the farewell speech, a farewell to the nation. So I think the situation we are now was clear to bright minds like Eisenhower's 70s years ago. So I think we should pick up these efforts and continue. And in the topic of what we can do, I must say to Michele, we're trying to create a new political force. What's the harm in proposing both to get a nuclear deterrence and strengthening with the same effort and with the same intensity the diplomacy and the, even more sophisticated non-violent tools like sanctions that really works. Not I'm sanctioning you, but I'm covering my eyes if goods are coming from the back door.
As I said, I'm sorry.
When you asked whether Europe would be safer with its own nuclear weapons, the answer is I don't think it makes any real difference. And it may make some sense for Europe to develop its own. That's a whole debate we'll have to have. I was talking about the need for a new mode of thinking for humanity to survive. And by the way, I've given talks at the Air Force Academy, the U.S. Air Force Academy, and I thank the cadets for giving up so many of their civil liberties to serve our nation. I tell them, if someone asks me to go to Afghanistan, I can say no, thank you. And I then asked them on my last visit, I said, if after you graduate, your commanding officer asks you to go to Afghanistan, what do you say? And they gave the right answer, yes, sir. And so but then I added, it's incumbent on us, the electorate, to make sure we don't put them in harm's way as we've done time and time again, and then withdrawn. We need to stop this because it's also putting us in harm's way, which we don't realize.
And also, I think, Martin, your paper, Rethinking National Security, has a very bold and interesting statement, which is the United States were totally secure after World War II, and trillions of dollars in investment in nuclear weapons, new weapons, and defense in general has brought you to a point where you are actually not secure as you were. Now, this is not this is true for everybody, also for people that did not invest in defense as much as the U.S. did, but it brought us.
Sure, I understand this statement. Can you go through this statement?
So it says in 1945, when World War II ended, the United States was inviolate. No one could attack us. Since then, we've invested vast sums of money, trillions of dollars, to improve our national security. We put some of our best minds to work with the paradoxical result that today we can be destroyed in under an hour. What went wrong?
Well, that some other people did the thing. I'm sorry, this is a completely senseless argument. There was no moment in which the life is dynamic, so is history. All right? There was an agreement in Yalta, and it was not a friendly agreement. It was an agreement based on the balance of power. And the game continued the day after. It wasn't over. There's not some magic instant in which the US is super safe, and the only thing they have to do is to say, Gede style, stop. The moment it's beautiful, the world will not change. Other people did other thing. So did the Americans. Americans had people pressuring for fighting communism worldwide. So did Churchill. But the splitting of Germany, the occupation of Berlin, the occupation of all the countries of the Warsaw Pact were a fact. So there is a sequence of historical events that took place. The war in Indochina was not over. The decolonization process was not over. The statement, this statement is just anti-historical and anti-scientific. It pretends that there was a magic moment that could be suspended forever. And the only thing that the Americans had to do was to say, let's freeze the war right now. And nobody does anything. That's just not true.
I never said
it's not the way of thinking.
I haven't said that. And by the way, your position actually shows why people don't need to worry about my taking the position I do. There are a lot of people like you who are going to still talk about we need a military, and I agree with that, by the way. And so my talking about where we need to go is not going to unilaterally change the West, but we need somebody to be talking about where we need to go so that we can begin to move in that direction. And we're not going to jump there. We're going to move there in a process. And people like you will be there to ensure that our national security is well taken care of. As in fact, I will try as well.
Well, I don't know. There is a tension here that one has to be very careful, Martin. I do believe that the only strategy is a mixed strategy, given that before the Nash equilibrium and again, theoretical argument were brought up. So a mixed strategy means with different probabilities, you push different buttons. And one of the buttons is the appeasement, if you want to call it that way, or the diplomacy, or the invitation to sign treaties and scale down nuclear weaponry and so on and so forth. So I'm not saying that one should not use that, but it has to be part of a, how can I say, well understood strategy which has a variety of components. Conflicting, I don't think it's useful politically, especially given the way United States is now, especially given what the dominant political forces are in the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere now, to claim that there is a completely different approach that could solve the problems. I see what you're saying and the type of arguments you've been developing and other people have been developing as part of the mixed strategy that the West, whatever the West can be right now, can use. I don't see an opposition. I don't see one against the other. I think they're both part of the same.
It's a process, and you're right. Right now we need both because of the way the world is, but we need to be moving in a positive direction. Well, listen, I realize it's been about an hour. How are we on time? Because I need to.
Yeah. No, we are perfectly on time, and you have family to take care of.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, there's been a fire at a hotel which my daughter was staying at, but that's a whole nother thing. So thank you for taking us away from that.
I think it was very useful. I think we basically said what we had to do. Then it's for people to make up their mind and learn and read their writings and follow up. So I'm very grateful we had this conversation.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you for having me. And it's one thing you said is really true. We need to be very careful, and we're not being careful enough. This is part of what I work on. Is we need to be a lot more careful.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Okay.
Enjoy Stanford. Take care. Thank you. Thank you, Marco, for organizing this.
Oh, Michele, if I just can say something, I think Pugwash group with
I was just allowing Martin to go, and then we'll close up but because he might have things to do.
Okay, I'm going to leave, and I'll let you go.
No, it's fine. So unless you want to tell something to Martin, Marco.
No. I just wanted to close on a positive note. I think we reach a good point. Mixed strategy is good. It's probably the way forward. And it's also the way that was highlighted by Einstein and Russell and the Pugwash group when they wrote the manifest about atomic dearming. They began with we're talking as members of the human species, not as citizens of this country or that country. The only way to solve this kind of issue is to elevate to an international level and bring the discussion to the international level.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks, Martin. Thanks again.
Okay. And good luck
Bye-bye.
with forming a new party. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Proviamo a dire, ma anche a fare, l'ovvio.